Every time I watch RLCS these days and they play this like 3D hyper-realistic renders of Rocket League, I don't know how exactly they create these, but they're pretty impressive. But anyways, when I see these, I wonder to myself, why can't Turbo make a backboard read? Like, it's not that hard to do. See, watch this. He just hit the ball up off the backboard and hit it in. I know he was on defense on this shot, but come on. No, actually, I see these renders and I wonder, what is Rocket League going to be like in the future? And specifically, will there ever be a Rocket League 2? A completely redesigned, refocused, basically all new Rocket League with different physics, different graphics, and new cars, new stadiums, and everything just completely different. Is that even possible or necessary? Or is Rocket League more of a game like CSGO or League, where the game doesn't really ever undergo a completely new version of itself, but rather it's just consistent, updates and changes to the point where you can't really see the difference when it's happening. But then when you go back, like I did not that long ago, and looked at the first version of Rocket League, well, it feels very different. You just can't really see it happening as you're playing it. But again, this is not, this idea of having a completely new version of the game. Well, interestingly enough, there actually is a middle ground between something like a Rocket League 2, a completely different game, and say what like League and CSGO do, which is never make huge, massive changes, or just sort of like scrap big parts of the game. And I would say this middle ground is kind of like what Fortnite has done. Fortnite Chapter 2 is not a different game per se, but it is a complete overhaul of the game. Now, this is actually something Rocket League could do pretty easily because the physics, of Fortnite and the gameplay didn't really change with Chapter 2, at least at the core. They didn't like remove building or change the way guns work or something like that. At least I don't think that they did. But everything else, all the secondary stuff, or at least most of it, was changed. Let's imagine for a second that Epic Games and Psyonix did to Rocket League what they did to Fortnite, because I really don't think any other option is possible. It's interesting to think about, but a lot of these probably aren't going to happen. What would it look like? What would these changes be? So the way I see it, if there ever was to be a Rocket League 2 or some variation of that scenario, there's really only 3 ways that they could do it. And I'm going to go through these ideas from least plausible to most plausible. All right, let's start with my favorite possibility, but certainly the least plausible. And this is the possibility of Rocket League being completely re-released as a different game altogether. Now, don't forget, before you just completely count this out, the Rocket League that you're playing is actually a sequel to a previous game. People like to call that game the prequel to Rocket League, but that's really not true. At least it wasn't when that game was out. That was, the car soccer game, and people were playing it. Like 18 people were playing it. SARP was the original Rocket League, and what you're playing today is a polished, revamped, completely new version of that original game with, completely different physics, completely different gameplay, but the core idea. Rocket League is SARP 2, if that makes sense. So what was the trajectory from SARP to Rocket League, and how could that apply to this potential Rocket League 2 of the future? Well, first off, Rocket League has way more realistic physics and graphics, and in that sense, it feels slower, and the look is just generally more real, I guess, like more realistic. So it is possible, based on this, and based on a lot of other video games, that if there was going to be a Rocket League 2, better, more realistic graphics, and the physics would be more realistic. A while back, I made a video talking to Halfway Dead about the physics of Rocket League and whether it would actually be possible to have Rocket League in real life. And he pointed out to me over and over again that the physics in Rocket League and the way the cars and the boost behave are actually totally impossible in the real world. So maybe Rocket League 2 would take on more realistic, slow physics and mechanics. Now, there's more that would obviously happen. You'd get new cars, different maps, new features, perhaps a new system for leveling up and advancing through the game, maybe even something like a story mode. I don't know. It's hard to imagine something like this, though, isn't it? Don't you think that we would all probably hate it, at least at first? Well, that's actually how the SARP vets felt when Rocket League, first came out. It was too slow and too realistic for them. And even not that long ago, I was talking to Jazer in San Diego when we went to Psyonix, and he still, even today, talks about the old game and just how fast it was and how challenging it was. And he almost talks about it like, in some ways, he wants it to go back to that. Now, this is similar, to the way that games like Madden have gone from fast-paced and totally unrealistic back in like 2006 and 2007 to now, which, I think the new games in Madden are honestly kind of boring compared to those old games. Who knows though, maybe it would just be horrible, like the rocket-powered cars would just explode horrifically on impact, like this car from the RLCS intro, or this car from that movie called the Darwin Awards. Maybe the cars wouldn't be able to flip or jump or dodge, because that would just be too unrealistic, and it would just be like the lame attempts at real life car soccer where these really slow cars just like bonk a ball around. Now, there's lots of reasons that I really don't think that this is plausible, but the main one is that Rocket League is an esport, and doing this would completely kill the esports and competitive scene as we know it. Now, many players would probably adapt. Maybe the current pros would be able to stay on top, or maybe players like myself would suddenly become the absolute best in the world. That's, it's possible. But this probably isn't going to happen. It's interesting to imagine. I don't know, let us know down below what you guys think like a Rocket League 2 would look like. But for now, let's jump over to the second possibility. And that is that the Chinese version of Rocket League, or at least the model that they're using, will basically take over the Rocket League that we play here in the West and, wherever people play it outside of China. Now, if you saw Rizzo's video playing the Chinese version of Rocket League, which, by the way, just launched a few weeks back, you probably saw that it felt very different. Now, the big thing that I could see happening isn't necessarily all of this game and all of its oddities, as we see it from our perspective, being applied to our version of Rocket League, but more the model. The game is free to play. We already know an item shop is coming. Crates are leaving for blueprints, and then basically whatever else comes with the Chinese Rocket League version to sort of support developers. If all of that goes well with China, it could definitely work for us. The Chinese version of Rocket League has way more tutorial stuff, or at least it seems like it does. So, I feel like that would be good. Maybe some, tutorial could help Turbo learn how to deal with backboard shots. Or, we could even get the ball indicator thing, that like shows where the ball is going. I'm not sure why this is in the Chinese version, and it kind of sucks because I feel like I need this. I do think that there is a lot involved with the Chinese version. I think that China really is like the testing ground for the ultimate version of Rocket League that all of us will be playing in 2020. It's possible. All right, guys, the last possibility is actually possible for multiple reasons, and that is the idea of a Rocket League Chapter 2, much like Fortnite Chapter 2, as we mentioned earlier. And what Fortnite did to their game is probably one of the most interesting things any game developer has ever pulled off for a game, especially a competitive game like Fortnite. It's not just some story mode game and you put out a Chapter 2 version. It's actually a competitive game with an esport. Now, if you don't play Fortnite, or never heard of it, or you live in a barn or something, you might have missed the whole Fortnite escapade about a month ago, having to do with their in-game event. I know that Rocket League players tend to live within their own little community sometimes, but if you want to keep up with this stuff, just go on Twitter and follow me, follow others. You'll be able to keep up with not just Rocket League, but kind of the whole gaming world. But anyways, Fortnite shut down their game for like a day and a half or something like that, and then released almost a completely different version of Fortnite. They didn't go as far as they could have. The items didn't really change that much, and obviously the physics didn't really change, but the weapons for the most part completely changed. Some stayed, but most of it was different. And then the map was completely different. So in Rocket League's case, applying this idea, since Epic Games does now own Rocket League, it would look like a complete overhaul of the cosmetics stuff, potentially all new maps, all new cars even. How insane would that be? And maybe even a shift away from like the standard maps, new game modes, get rid of Snow Day, something like that. Maybe Rocket League would add the big map with more players. That's a concept that I think a lot of people have been sort of dreaming of. I think personally, if anything is going to happen, it's going to be a combination of the second and third options. A Rocket League version that's free and uses, some of the systems that the Chinese version uses, and then a complete overhaul of the maps and items and cars. Imagine a world where there's no octanes, where we just have like 8 brand new cars, and that's what you get. You just got to use it. And they all have different hitboxes because that's what we all want. And then slowly Psyonix adds in new cars, brings back maybe some old cars, maybe in the middle of like 2032, they unvault the Octane and the Dominus. And, my grandkids are like, what is this? And I'm like, oh son, let me tell you a story about the time I used the Dominus for an entire month. Anyways, let us know what you think. Would you like to see a Rocket League 2, or would you cry your eyes out? Just stick with the old version. Except in Fortnite's example, you can't play the old version. So yeah, anyways, let us know what you think. Keep the discussion going in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.